The first thing to say was there weren't many surprises in it because the government actually wanted to do the opposite to what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng had done, and as you said, pitch roll this, lay the ground so there wasn't any surprises that would unnerve or ripple the markets or unnerve voters or indeed Conservative MPs. So that's the first thing. So it was kind of as expected, apart from, as you said, a couple of little rabbits in terms of a bit more spending for schools and a bit more for hospitals in the next 2 years. But the big picture, let's go back to the big picture and what's really happening in people's lives and households, because that actually, despite all the rhetoric of this being reasonable and fair, that's where it's going to hit people. The first thing to say is it was indeed 55 billion of tax rises and spending cuts. But what the government has done, and I've just got the scorecard, this is where you see all the numbers of how it all actually adds up. So Jeremy Hunt spins it in a certain way and then you see the numbers and it tells you what's really going on. In terms of the spending cuts, they have been completely backloaded to the next Parliament. Politically, why? Because the government can look like it is consolidating the public finances, but the pain of those spending cuts will not be felt potentially by this government, given that they might not be in power post-2025. Of the 30 billion of spending cuts the government have announced, I find it 21 billion of them end up in 2027 to 28. So you can see exactly what's happening in terms of the government backloading that pain, causing potentially a Labour government the difficulties of taking those decisions on tax and spend. If you go back to the taxation that we are seeing, 24 billion, as we thought, or 24.7 billion of total tax decisions. And that has been weighted in part onto business. You've got about 6 billion coming in from those energy levies. You've got this freezing of NI employers' contributions. That brings the Treasury in 5 billion. But for all of us, freezing income tax threshold drags millions of people into higher bands. It affects everyone in the country that pays income tax. And by 2027, that is raising 6.8 billion for the Treasury. And when you look at, in terms of what they've done for spending in the short term, in this Parliament, yes, they've kept the spending envelope from March 2022. That's about 3% of spending growth. But if you put that against what inflation's at, that's a big spending squeeze on schools and hospitals and unprotected budgets, which is why perhaps the Chancellor's decided to put a bit more money in. But there is going to be a spending squeeze. There's going to have to be efficiency savings, and that has a knock-on effect for public sector pay. So in terms of how this affects households, you're going to have income tax rises for everyone. You're going to have public sector pay being squeezed. And just in terms of how these decisions are hitting households, the OBR report, and this is from Paul Johnson from the IFS digging this out, not me, I should say, he's pointing out that real household disposable income per person is going to fall by more than 7% over the next 2 years. It's the biggest fall on record. It will be taking household incomes down to 2013 levels. Energy bills are going to go up to £3,000 April 2023, a typical household paying that. So I think politically what Jeremy Hunt has tried to do here is take the Conservative Party back onto the centre ground, acknowledging that he needs to or wants to protect NHS and education budgets, things that matter very much to the public, giving pensioners that inflation lift, giving benefits that inflation lift, giving more support to households, more vulnerable households on energy bills. So that's the nod to compassion and fairness in the budget. But in reality, what they are dealing with, if you have to take a decision, you have to have 55 billion of financial consolidation. It's massive and it's going to be painful and it's going to be felt by households up and down the country.